As I parked my pickup truck, I smirked, wondering if Angie would be surprised that I had come home so early. I hadn't finished the repairs yet, but I needed some parts that were stored in my shed. The job site was 120 kilometers away, and I would normally stay there until the work was done. However, when I ordered the part one needed, I found out it would take 3 days to arrive. The farmer couldn't afford to have his thresher idle for that long, and since I often did this kind of repair, I would usually make a few extra parts at a time. If I want to pick it up myself, the owner would save at least 2 days. In farming, when it comes to harvest time, time is money. He even offered me an extra $200 when I told him I knew where to get the part. I never told him that I made it myself because, technically, although it wasn't illegal, it was frowned upon, and I had good relationships with my suppliers. I turned off the farm road and drove up to my workshop. Smiling, I parked my truck, but I frowned when I saw the cars. A luxurious vintage convertible Mercedes and a black SUV. As soon as I turned the key, the door burst open, and a huge black man appeared in the doorway, holding a large automatic pistol. Immediately fearing the worst for my wife, I raised my hands, and he let me inside. I got a good look at his weapon and, though I had never seen it before, I recognized the silencer. Fear turned to horror when he led me into the dining room, and I saw Angie sprawled out on the table, completely naked. There was a short man, also naked. He smirked. "You weren't supposed to be here, but now seems like the perfect time to share some news. She's really into me, and I'm taking her home with me. We've been sleeping together for about 8 months now, and we've been very fortunate that you've gotten to travel so much." "What, why? Angie?" She sat up, smirking. "You ruined the whole plan. Damn it." I released his juice right on the spot where you usually sit. "So even if I leave and you never find out about it, you'll be sitting right on his juice stains." "Why?" "He's rich and powerful and gives me everything I want." "Sure, I had to leave most of the money at his place, but now you know. Expect to see me in court in designer dresses, maybe even a fur coat, depending on how long this takes." The short man smirked. "Here's the deal. This is a nice place, so when the divorce happens, it's hers. In return, you can keep your business and whatever you manage to save. It doesn't matter whether you agree or not, it's going to happen." My home sat on 14 hectares of land. All that was left of the large farm my great-great-grandfather had purchased before this area even became a state. I finally found my voice. "Only over my dead body." "Oh, you've chosen Plan B. I'll give you one more chance. Jerome, convince this man." Jerome was probably around 195 centimeters tall, with bulging muscles, and he smirked. "Got it, boss. I won't break anything on his right hand so he can still sign." "Good idea. If he resists, shoot him. Widowhood will work just as well, maybe even better." Jerome placed his weapon on the table, ready to kick my ass. I took cover behind the table, right in front of the old-fashioned panoramic window that my loving wife had refused to let me replace. I believed it was raising our heating and cooling costs, but Angie liked the view. He didn't expect it, and I threw one of the heavy oak chairs at him, catching him off guard and knocking him down. The other guy picked up the gun, while the boss yelled at him to shoot me, so I grabbed another chair and hurled it at the window, then jumped out after it. I hit the ground and got to my feet, running. Jerome grabbed his weapon and jumped through the window right after me, shooting as he ran. I heard the gun make a sound like compressed air and saw clumps of dirt fly up in the moonlight. Then I felt as if a hot iron had been dragged across my arm, which made me run even faster. My tool shed was to my right, so I darted towards it and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. Jerome was cursing at a mile a minute. "You little bastard. Come out, or I'll kill you slowly." I desperately looked around for some kind of defensive weapon when I saw it. We lived in an area right on the edge of a ridge, and I had bought one of those weed burners to keep them at bay. Angie liked it, but she complained about having to lug around the heavy propane tank. One day, she showed me a couple of YouTube videos. Elon Musk was actually selling flamethrowers that looked like water guns kids use, but they were sold out. There was another website that copied his idea, using a children's toy as the base. Since I was a welder, machinist, and mechanic, it didn't take me long to figure it all out. I used an old .410 shotgun that a friend had given me because it was damaged and unusable. I bought the necessary parts, inserted a metal pipe into the barrel, then installed a burner head that I had modified so that when turned, the flame could rise about 15 centimeters instead of 10. A side effect was that, with the ignition off, it would shoot out 3 times farther. It was rated at 3,400 degrees at full throttle, and I estimated that when throttled down, the temperature was around 4,000. I added an adapter so it could run on the small cylinders that campers use for stoves and lanterns. A full tank would last about 15 minutes, and I removed the trigger and replaced it with a powerful igniter, because the standard one would fail if you tried to light it with the valve wide open. The safety latch was right in front of the trigger guard, and I could open it with a flick of my finger. Angie liked it and called it the blaster, and thus it was born. I managed to screw on a new cylinder while he was pounding on the door, then reached out and unlocked it just as he slammed into it with his shoulder. He stumbled inside, scrambled up with his gun in hand, and started looking for me. When he saw me, the blaster was about 50 centimeters from his face. The last thing he saw on this earth was the flash of flames. When a 3,000-degree flame hits your face from that distance, bad things happen. Your eyeballs melt instantly, and your nose chars down to the cartilage. Your lips burn away, and your tongue resembles a sausage that's been left on the grill too long. The flame sears your throat, scorching your lungs. You collapse to the ground, making choking sounds, likely in excruciating pain, until you die. Not that I cared, but I dragged him out of the shed because his clothes were on fire. I looked at the shapeless mass on his shoulders and remembered the smirk on his face when he was about to attack me. Screw him. He probably got what he deserved, and I wondered how many other husbands had suffered at his hands. My adrenaline was still pumping, and now I was angry. Really angry. I picked up the blaster and the gun, checking the magazine. 3 rounds left. Then it occurred to me that he wouldn't have come without spare ammo, and I found 2 magazines on his belt. I cranked up the gas on the blaster and headed for the house. I didn't have a plan, but as I passed the little sports car, an idea came to me. One long blast from the blaster set it on fire. Even the tires were burning. I waited by the door, expecting them to notice. 3 minutes later, I heard screams, and his second thug opened the door. I shot him twice in the face before he hit the ground, dead as far as I was concerned. I tucked the gun into my belt and walked into the dining room. Angie must have been embracing a nudist lifestyle because she was still naked, just like the bastard. He had a small automatic pistol in his hand, but before he could use it, I set him on fire with the blaster, right in the groin. He was burned from the tops of his thighs to the lower part of his abdomen. I had never heard anyone scream so loudly, and he turned around. Looking for? I have no idea. He was still holding the gun and emptied the magazine wildly. 2 bullets hit Angie. One in the head, the other in the groin. She was dead before she hit the ground. This was not at all what I wanted, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. Instead, I focused on the jerk. He was still holding the gun, more out of instinct than anything else, but it was empty. The last thing he saw in this world was flames as I blasted fire into his face for 3 seconds. It took him about 5 minutes to die. As I exhaled, I started to sit down when I realized the house was on fire. It seemed I had hit the curtains, and they caught fire. My old house had interior panels made of heart pine, which I had sanded and stained. My insurance agent told me it increased the value by $5,000, but that wasn't the point. The stain would caught fire pretty quickly. I realized this could solve a lot of my problems, so I ran past the burning car, tossed the dead guy into a wheelbarrow, rolled it to the door, tipped it over, and dropped him next to his partner. I ran back to the shed, slammed the door, jumped into my truck, and slowly drove off, taking the same route I had arrived by. Just before I went out of sight, there was an explosion and a fireball shot into the sky, so the fire must have reached the car's gas tank. Once I got onto the main highway, I sped up, not encountering a single soul for 20 kilometers. An hour and a half later, I pulled up to a small family motel where I was staying and went into my room. And then a tremor overtook me, along with a wave of regret. I had killed 3 people and was responsible for my wife's death. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, but when dawn broke, I took a shower, went to the diner next door, and managed to eat a little breakfast. The farmer was surprised to find me at the field so early, and I told him that I had found the part in my truck. Within 2 hours, he was back up and running, and I stayed for half an hour to make sure everything was working fine. I knew it would be bad, but it was still a shock. All that was left of my house were 2 chimneys and a third of the wall on the back porch. The cops, the coroner, and some plainclothes people with police on their jackets watched as I pulled up. One of the sheriff's deputies slowly approached me. I had gone to school with Hal. We got drunk together for the first time when we were 16, went on double dates twice, and I was even the best man at his wedding. What the hell happened? Sorry, buddy. By the time we got here, the fire was nearly out, and there was nothing the firefighters could do. Where's Angie? He put a hand on my shoulder. She was inside. We're waiting for it to cool down a bit so we can recover the bodies. Bodies? Yes, she wasn't alone. There were at least 3 others, and before you ask, we have no idea what's going on. I looked past him and noticed 2 charred corpses in the front and 2 more in what used to be the living room. It all hit me at once. The deaths, the betrayal, and the fact that I hadn't slept for 40 hours straight. I passed out. I woke up in the hospital with an 4 in my arm. The paramedics were also friends. It was hard not to know everyone in such a small town, and Sherry placed a hand on my chest. Stay still, honey. You were in shock, so we brought you to the hospital for observation, and they'll probably keep you overnight. What happened? Sherry winced. I don't know. We've never worked a crime scene like this before, and I hope I never have to again. The only reason we were there was to transport the bodies to the morgue. She realized what she had said and covered her mouth with her hand. I'm so sorry, Johnny. Let's get you settled in. I was admitted, given a thorough examination, and given a small injection that knocked me out for 11 hours. When I woke up, some sort of alarm went off, and 2 nurses and a doctor came in right away. They put me through a series of small physical and mental exercises and concluded that I was in good shape. How soon can I get out of here? The doctor smirked. In a hurry? The kitchen is serving meatloaf today, and I know you won't want to miss it. Seriously, we'll check on you again in 5 hours, and if nothing unexpected comes up, you'll be able to leave. The nurse stayed behind. Are you ready for visitors? Who knows I'm here? Everyone in the county, and probably the whole state. A burned-down house with 4 bodies tends to make the news. Hal, the sheriff's deputy, 3 guys from the SBI, and 2 guys who don't want to talk but have federal agents written all over their faces. Oh, and your family. I might as well get this over with. Call the cops in first. Hal introduced them to each other. One was a homicide detective, 2 were arson experts from the state, and 2 were special agents from Homeland Security. The state guys started talking first. First, let us express our condolences for your wife. We know this is hard, but are you able to talk? Of course, but I don't know what to tell you. 2 days ago, I left with a kiss from my wife and a beautiful home, and when I returned, I found my house burned to the ground with her inside. I probably have more questions for you than you have for me. Let's start with your timeline. I understand you have a business that requires you to travel from time to time, correct? I told them about my business, as described in Reader's Digest, and how I had to travel 2 or 3 times a month. However, most of my work was local, and I operated from home, traveling anywhere from 1 to 50 kilometers for client jobs. That was my whole business. If you couldn't come to me, I'd come to you, for a very good fee. I suppose you can confirm your whereabouts? I gave them the phone number of the farmer I was working for. I also provided them with the motel's number and the name of the diner where I had lunch. They wanted more detailed information. How am I supposed to do that? I went to work. I did the job, ate at the diner, and stayed the night at the motel. I'm sure they can give you more precise times than I can. Do I need a lawyer? Am I being accused of something? For God's sake, my wife is lying in the morgue. One of the federal agents spoke up. You're not suspected of anything at this point. If you feel you need a lawyer, we can stop and make this more formal. From your reaction, it seems there's much more going on here than you realize. By tomorrow, all the bodies will be identified, but we've already gathered a lot of information by checking the tags. Once we get confirmation, we'll proceed. My blood pressure spiked, setting off an alarm, and the nurse kicked them all out. The next morning, Hal came by himself, picked me up, and took me to the station, where I was interrogated again. The feds were asking random, unrelated questions, and I felt like they were fishing for something. Eventually, I lost my temper. You know what? Screw you guys. You're good at asking questions, but not so great at giving answers. So either charge me with something or let me go. I'm done talking. Keep this up, and I'll bring in the lawyers. I can release a press statement expressing my frustration with the harassment I'm facing from the authorities while my wife lies in the morgue. There were a few minutes of silence, and everyone was giving me sideways glances. Finally, I stood up, and one of the federal agents asked me to sit back down. We've identified all the bodies. Unfortunately, one of them is your wife. It appears she was shot, as was one of the men in the hallway. The other man and the man in the living room seem to have died in the fire. None of this makes sense. If two of them weren't shot, why didn't they leave the house? An SBI agent took over. Your house was deliberately set on fire, and the living room was the point of origin. We're almost certain they used some kind of accelerant, but the analysis isn't complete yet. Do you know who Zeb Burns is? He's a senator, right? The one under investigation? Correct. The man who was in the living room with your wife was his son, Brad. We suspect he was his father's fixer, and they were involved with some very shady people who were moving millions around. The two men were bodyguards he traveled with, Jerome Stiles and Henderson Franks. This might be some kind of deal gone wrong. The senator is in shock right now. They weren't very good bodyguards if they all ended up dead, were they? Now that you know who they are, could you figure out why they were in my house? I've never heard of any of them, except for the politician. The federal agent grimaced. It appears your wife was having an affair with Brad Burns. We have some surveillance photos of them together, taken 2 weeks ago at the Excelsior Hotel. I sighed. I'd like to say that's a blatant lie, but you have evidence, so I'll accept it. Any idea how this started? No, but your wife, was a very beautiful woman, and he seemed to know how to charm the ladies. Since they were at your house, it could have been just a date or something more serious. Define something serious. The senator's personal assistant and his son might have been looking for a place away from prying eyes, and your property is completely isolated. No close neighbors, surrounded by woods and fields, with limited access. A thought struck me. Are you suspecting me of being involved with them in any way? That's an open question. Were you involved? I stood up. I'm done talking. I don't want to deal with this crap right now. How soon can I collect my wife's body for burial? I looked confused when one of the state officials said they would finish the inspection by the next day. They asked me to stay and continue the conversation, but I declined. I'm leaving now. I don't like where these discussions are heading, and although I haven't done anything wrong, I think going forward, we'll have legal representation. You can coordinate with whoever I choose to arrange further interviews. I stepped outside to find Angie's sister and mother waiting for me. Her mother rushed into my arms, sobbing, while Gail kept her distance. I needed to speak with her privately and as soon as possible. I comforted her mother, but I didn't cry, attributing it to numbness. However, after learning of Angie's infidelity, I realized I no longer had any feelings for her. We went to the funeral home, and I let her mother choose the casket and flowers, telling them we'd call when they retrieved the body. The casket would be closed because there was nothing to see but a charred piece of flesh. They wouldn't be able to embalm her, and the director pulled me aside to explain that they would keep her frozen until the service and that the casket would be closed due to the potential smell. I nodded, signed what needed to be signed, and left. I had a friend in real estate who found me a small apartment that would suit my needs. I was still working on the farm, and none of the buildings had burned down. They explained the car fire as overheating from the house. The front of the SUV was badly burned, so it was a reasonable assumption. The funeral was held on Sunday, and a large crowd attended. I played the part of the grief-stricken widower as they lowered her into the grave. On Monday, I called my insurance agent and got some bad news and a little bit of good news. I can't pay out for the house because it's still a crime scene. Once everything is cleared up, We'll start processing the paperwork. What we can do is process the life insurance. The cause of her death has been determined, and you'll receive a check by the end of the week. I think that once the paperwork is finalized, we'll be able to issue a check for the property. I'm really sorry about Angie, John. Any idea what happened? Thanks, Fred. The investigation is still ongoing, and I've been told not to discuss it. Call me when I can collect the money. Then I went to see Gail. I looked her in the eye. Tell me the truth, Gail. Angie's gone, and you don't need to protect her anymore. Did you know? To her credit, she told me the truth. I found out about it a week before her death, by accident. When I confronted her, we had a strange conversation. She told me she had found her true soulmate and was planning to leave you by the end of the month. Angie said she was trying to figure out a way to keep the house, and for the first time during our conversation, I laughed and told her that no judge in the state would give it to her. Plus, I reminded her about the prenuptial agreement, which stated that everything had to be split equally, except for the house. She looked at me and almost smiled, saying she had a way. We didn't speak after that, and now she's dead. What's going on? All I can say is that she might have gotten involved in something she couldn't control, and it came back to bite her. I've always liked you and your mom, and I'd like to stay in your lives somehow, but if it's too difficult. She threw herself into my arms and kissed me passionately. I didn't expect that today. Mom is going to rely on you even more now. It was just me and Angie, and now it's only me. And if you want my opinion, you married the wrong sister. What? You were 15 when we met. She giggled. You should have waited. Anyway, I'm all grown up now. I know you need to mourn and come to terms with what Angie did. But once I'm sure you're in your right mind, you're going to take me out to dinner. She laughed when she saw the shocked expression on my face. Okay, seriously, Mom doesn't need to know about Angie. I think the way she died makes her suspicious, but we should let her keep the image of a good daughter. It would be pointless to tell her the truth. Agreed. I love your mom too much to hurt her. The cops released the body 2 weeks later, having determined that she died from a gunshot wound to the head from a .380 caliber automatic pistol found at the scene. It was badly burned, but they retrieved the magazine and found Brad Burns' fingerprints on the casings, even though all the bullets had exploded from the heat. A week after that, I received the life insurance payout. I felt guilty for accepting it, but I reasoned that this whole fiasco wasn't my fault. If she had stayed faithful to me, it wouldn't have mattered, and she would still be alive. I never wanted her to die. I wanted her to live a long life full of regrets, but that wasn't meant to be. It took almost a year before I received the check for the house. It was enough to build a really beautiful home on the other side of the property. I kept the other buildings intact, using the address for my business. I connected it to a fire safety system, and I was glad I hadn't done that before. 6 months after the incident, they closed the investigation, attributing it to criminal activity gone wrong. They had no evidence that I was there, and I had a solid alibi from the motel manager, the farmer, and the waitress at the diner, so I was cleared from their list of suspects. And that's how I got away with murder. Well, not exactly murder, if you don't count the fact that the guy was a jerk. The actions against the bodyguards could have been written off as self-defense, but burning Brad Burns' crotch would have landed me in prison. As for Angie, I was sorry she was killed. I'll always wonder what made her think she had a better offer, but from what I learned about that family, I had a feeling it would end badly. In the end, the senator got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He resigned, forcing his party to find a replacement 4 months before the election. His party lost the seat by a wide margin. One day, Hal stopped by and told me that a group of teenagers in the area was causing trouble. He advised me to stay alert and keep the cameras on, especially since I was often away from home. He caught me while I was out patrolling for weeds. I had managed to keep the kudzu in check, and I inspected it every 2 weeks. My father used to say, "Rust never sleeps. Kudzu always creeps." He was impressed with the blaster. I had made several improvements, the most important of which was an auxiliary trigger at the front. Pressing it would instantly release gas without the need to turn the valve. I also refined the nozzle, reducing its size by 2 centimeters. If the flame was close enough, it could cut through a 5mm thick piece of metal in about 30 seconds. If it were steel, it would take longer. Naturally, he had to give it a try, grinning as flames shot out. Man, you could definitely. He stopped, stared at me, and smirked before handing it back to me. You should patent this. You could make a great manufacturer. And don't forget to keep the surveillance cameras on. I did as he suggested and caught some kids vandalizing my tool shed. Over the next few days, I thought a lot about what he said. Then I redesigned the blaster, making it sturdier and more like a flamethrower than a weed burner. After that, I consulted the lawyer I had hired. 6 months later, I was informed that the patent was pending, which meant I could start manufacturing. So, I produced 100 units and tested the market. They sold so well that it was time to open a factory. I rented a manufacturing building, hired 12 people for the production line, and 2 office staff, and we went to market. We were producing about 35 units a day, with an 8-month backlog of orders. I was exhausted and went to the office to complain. My office staff smirked. We told you this would happen. It's time to let your lawyers handle it and talk to some big players who are showing interest. You don't need to sell it. Just sign a licensing agreement to protect yourself. Gail laughed. Mom's right. Want me to call Jack? Yes. 9 months later, we struck a deal where I received a pretty decent percentage from every product manufactured. We made sure to cover ourselves by labeling each blaster with a warning, for home and agricultural use only. It was a very detailed disclaimer, printed large enough to be easily read. Production ramped up as interest grew, and soon the blasters were available in every home improvement store, hardware store, and online. The company that licensed the rights asked us to keep the small factory as a research and development shop. The people we hired were happy to keep their jobs, as were the office staff. With the money I now had, I looked around and found a larger home on 25 hectares, complete with barns, workshops, pasture, and woodland. The house had 4 bedrooms, really big bedrooms, and a 3-car garage with an apartment above it. It took 8 months and a ring, but Gail moved in with me, and then she spent some money fixing up the apartment. I supported the idea of moving her mom in with us. She was getting older, and we really didn't like the idea of her living alone. I was woken up by the cry of our baby. I was in a cold sweat. I had been dreaming about Angie. I never told anyone about it, especially not Gail or her mom. That secret I'll take to my grave. Gail mumbled something as I got up, changed our son, fed him, burped him, and rocked him back to sleep. The whole time, he was smiling. Earlier, Gail had told me that in about 7 months, he would have a little sister, which made me very happy. I couldn't shake the thought that they could have been Angie's children if she hadn't gotten involved with that jerk. For years, I kept going over it in my mind, trying to figure out if I had missed any signs, but I was completely baffled. The night before I left, we made love twice. It occurred to me that it was probably a farewell gesture to ease her conscience. Since I was already awake, I started the coffee maker and turned on the computer. I had sold my old business, and now our store was just 5 kilometers away, though I still had to attend meetings every couple of years with the company that held my licenses. Gail had always been with me until the baby was born, and now she split her time between him and her mom. Her mom was quite savvy and more experienced in business, noticing things I would have completely missed. A few years ago, I discovered websites where many stories about cheating wives were posted. One of them had a subgenre called Burn the Bitch, which featured unrealistic forms of revenge against unfaithful spouses. I smirked, thinking that although it happened entirely by chance, I had literally done that. Just then, the coffee maker beeped, and I poured a couple of cups as Gail stumbled out of the bedroom in a torn t-shirt and panties. Her belly was just beginning to show. She had never looked more beautiful. Thank you for listening until the end.